Hi, by the end of this video, you will know about all the uses of the infinitive in the Greek New Testament, and you will have seen each one of them illustrated from the Gospel of Matthew. My name's Rob McIver. Let's talk about infinitives. Now, I used Logos to search for all of the occurrences of the infinitive mood in the Gospel of Matthew. And then I took the ways that they are used in the New Testament, and you can see they can be used as the object of a verb, a subject of a verb. There's something called the articular infinitive. There's the infinitive in impersonal expressions, an infinitive of purpose, an infinitive of result, an infinitive in indirect speech, and infinitives in other stock constructions. And I noted each time one of these uses were found in the Gospel of Matthew. And then I drew a little pie graph of the results just to give us a feel for what are the most commonly found uses. And yes, hardly surprising, the infinitive as direct object is used 46.5% out of all the uses of the infinitive in the Gospel of Matthew. Then next in frequency, we have things like the articular infinitive and the infinitive in impersonal expressions, and the infinitive of purpose, and then there are the other uses. But let's dig in with some examples of each one of these uses. So the first use of the infinitive we're going to look at is the infinitive used as the object of a verb. So let's look at some examples of how this works out. In Matthew 4:17, and these are all taken from the Gospel of Matthew, we have apotota, exato, hoiesius, kairusin, kai legein. Kairusin and legein are infinitives, and they form the direct object of axato. From then, Jesus began to preach and to say, repent, the kingdom of heaven is near. Now, the verb dunamai is almost always followed by an infinitive verb. So, for example, in 6:24, we have udais, dunatai, dusai, kurios, duluine. No one is able to serve two masters. So we have dunatai, am able, he is able, and we have duluine, able to serve. What about the verb thallo, I wish? Matthew 16:24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wish to come behind me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. I tis thallo episo mu elthine. Thallo followed by elthine. Elthine acts as the object of the verb thallo, want to come. Matthew 24:6. You're about to hear of wars and rumors of wars. Mele seta de akuine. So from melo, about to, followed by the infinitive, and the infinitive here is acting almost like a noun. Well, in the first use of the infinitive we looked at, the infinitive was working as the object of a verb, rather like a noun might. Now, a noun can also be the subject of a verb. And yes, the infinitive can also be the subject of a verb. Let's look at the two examples of this use that are found in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew 15:20. These are the things that defile a man. Tot de a niptos kursen phagine uk koinoi ton anthropon. Well, it's a little bit complex, isn't it? We have ta de and niptos kursen phagine. The ta goes with phagine, the to eat. But what's this about unwashed hands? The, with unwashed hands, to eat. U does not. Koinoi, defile a man or the man. Yes, all right. Let's just do that again a little bit slowly. We have ta phagon, the to eat. Koinoi, defiles. The to eat is the subject of the verb defiles, and we have the, and niptos person, to eat. The, with unwashed hands, to eat, does not defile the man. The second example also is a little bit tricky. Let's look at it. He said to them, you will drink of my cup. To kathysai, the with an infinitive, the sitting, or the to sit, ek dexen, at my right, or ek euonumon, on the left, is not mine to give. Yes. So the ta kathysai is the subject of the verb esten there. It's not something we do in English, is it? We can understand what's going on, and then what we do is we translate the meaning into appropriate English language, which would go, well, you will indeed drink my cup, but it goes to those who have been prepared for it by my Father. All right. Our third use is the articular infinitive. And we see from our pie chart that while there are only two uses of the infinitive as the subject of a verb, and just as well, they're a little bit complex, there are a whole 24 uses of the articular infinitive. So it's something we need to look at. The good news is, though, once you have seen them and once you know the list of the various prepositions with the articular infinitive, they are consistent and relatively easy to understand and translate. We just have to realize that Greek is not English written with different words. It is its own language, and this is something that is unique to Greek when it's compared to English. Our first example there is taken from Matthew 2, verse 13. This is to, the article, the genitive article, to, and the infinitive is considered to be neuter. So this is the neuter genitive article. When we have to and the infinitive, it's usually used in a purpose clause. For example, in Matthew 2:13. Yes, I was a little bit confused there for a second because there's actually two infinitives there, aren't there? There is melai, about to, followed by infinitive. So Herod was about to seek the child. And here we get to the use that we are talking about, the articular infinitive, to apolesai auto, in order to destroy it. Yes, well, pedion is neuter, and so the auto is neuter as well. We would probably say destroy him. So, to apolesai, article plus infinitive, for purpose, in order to destroy him, for the purpose of destroying him. Matthew 13:3. Idu ex althen ho spiron to spirine. So here's a couple of interesting uses of the verb spiro, which means to sow. So we have ho spiron. This is an article turning a verb into a noun, the sower. We do something similar in English, don't we? With the very term the sower, we know the verb to sow, and we talk about the sower as the person who sows. So Greek does it with a participle. We have ho spirine. The sower goes out to spirine in order to sow or for the purpose of sowing. So that is the article with the infinitive without prepositions. It's not equivalent to anything in English, and it will surprise you probably for the first few times you see it. But once you've seen a number, you'll say, oh, that's just an articular infinitive, and like this, it means purpose. Now we have a number of examples here of different prepositions that are used with the infinitive. We have dia with the articular infinitive, dia to plus the infinitive for because. We have isto for purpose. We have ento for some duration of time, as or while. We have metato for after. We have proto for before. We have prosto for purpose or result. Again, English doesn't do this, but it is consistent in Greek, and once you've seen them, you almost welcome them because they are consistent in their meaning and so consistently straightforward to translate. As an example of diato, I've put there Matthew 24:12. Kai diato, pleithun thenai, tain a nomean, and because of the multiplication of lawlessness, the love of many grows cold. So the to pleithun thenai is a article with the infinitive after the preposition der, and the three elements together combine to form a causal clause. We have ento plus infinitive. Matthew 13:4. Kai ento spirein or ton, and during his sowing or while he was sowing. Matthew 13:25. Endato kathudine, and while the men were sleeping, his enemy came. A couple of examples of prosto plus infinitive to form purpose. Matthew 5:28. But I tell you that the one who looks at a woman pros to epithumesai or to has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So the pros to epithumesai for the purpose of, well, lust. Matthew 13, verse 30. At the time of harvest, I will say to the harvesters, gather first the weeds and bind them into bundles, pros to katakausai or to. So we have pros to plus the infinitive katakausai for the purpose of burning them. Just to repeat what you've already heard, articular infinitives look challenging for a start, but in fact, once you get to recognize them, they are straightforward to translate and understand. The infinitive is frequently used in impersonal expressions, and I have to say that in these usages, they actually do function as the direct object of the verb as well. But it's the class of the verbs which are impersonal, such as d, it is necessary, or existent, it is lawful. For example, in Matthew 24:6, Jesus says, mele saito de akuan. Yes, well, here's mele plus a direct object, isn't it? You're about to hear. It's not what we're looking at, though. You're about to hear of wars and rumors of wars. Beware, do not be troubled, for these things must be. Yes, d, ga, genesthai. It is necessary to happen. And in Matthew 26:54, we find d, genesthai again. It is necessary to happen. Existing. It is lawful. Well, we say this in English, but we don't say it that often. The verb existing, though, is found 26 times in the New Testament. It's translated impersonally, it. It is lawful. Matthew 12:2. And when the Pharisees saw, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing ho uk existin poiein in sabbato. Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. Existin followed by an infinitive, poiein to do, existin poiein, it is lawful to do. And in Matthew 12:10, and behold, a man having a withered hand, and they asked him, this being Jesus, saying, I existin toi sabbasin therapeusai. The core of this phrase is existin therapeusai. Is it lawful to heal? So they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So that they might condemn him. The impersonal expressions are relatively straightforward from an English speaker's perspective. It mirrors pretty much what we do in English once we know the verb means it is lawful or it is necessary. English also uses an infinitive after those two constructions. Another usage that you will find mirrored in English is the use of the Greek infinitive to express purpose. So we have here in Matthew 5:17, do not think that I came to destroy the law. Katalusai ton nomo. Katalusai, an infinitive. So if I was translating this more fully, it would be saying, do not think that I came in order to destroy the law or for the purpose of destroying the law. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. So we have three infinitives in that sentence, and they're all infinitives of purpose. Matthew 14:23. And after dismissing the crowd, he went into the mountain, kat idion, privately, pros euxasthai, to pray, in order to pray, for the purpose of praying. Matthew 26:55, Jesus said to the crowds, and then we have to do a little bit of fiddling to get a word order that makes sense in English. Hos epi leistes, as though you were coming against a robber or a bandit. Have you come out with swords and clubs as though I were a bandit? Sulabine me, in order to seize me or in order to arrest me. The infinitive is used to express purpose. Now we also have the infinitive used to express the result of something. And in this case, we have hosta plus the infinitive. So in Matthew 8:24, we have, and behold, there arose a great earthquake in the sea. Well, that's what it says literally. So the sea was greatly disturbed. Hosta, with a result that ta ploion kaluptesthai hupo tone kumaton, with the result that the boat started to fill up with the waves. Matthew 27:14, and he did not answer him, not even one word. Hosta thou madzine ton hegemona leon, with the result that thou madzine, the governor was amazed, or the governor marveled. The infinitive is used in indirect speech in the Greek New Testament. So let's ask ourselves, what is direct speech and what is indirect speech? Well, direct speech is where you quote the exact words of somebody, and in English we indicate direct speech with quote marks. Indirect speech is when you state that somebody said something, but you speak about it indirectly. You do not necessarily use the exact words that were heard. So, in my book, Intermediate New Testament Greek Made Easier, in chapter 7, section 7.1 on speech, I talk about the difference between direct speech and indirect speech. And about indirect speech, I say this. Indirect speech in English is indicated by the word that and adjusts person, tense, and mood. Indirect speech in New Testament period Greek uses hoti plus the indicative or the infinitive mood, or sometimes the optative mood. Greek does not adjust the tense used and frequently does not adjust the person. In brackets, the so-called hoti recitativum, where hoti becomes the equivalent of speech marks rather than a marker for indirect speech. And in the book, I go on to give some examples. Well, let's look at some examples for ourselves from the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew 16:12, for example, is in a passage which is introduced by Jesus telling his disciples to beware of the leaven of the scribes and Pharisees. And after a little dialogue in verse 12, it points out, then they understood that he did not speak or did not say pros ekine, to beware. I think in English we'd want to use an imperative mood, which is probably more in line with what Jesus actually said, which was beware. So he did not say, beware of the leaven of bread, but from the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And you can see that prosekein is in the infinitive mood, giving the content of what was said. Matthew 22:23. In that day, Sadducees came to him. Now, there's an interesting participle used there in an adjectival sense, right? Sadducees, legontus. Sadducees, the one who say. Sadducees came to him, those who say, me, einai, anastasin, not to be resurrection. Okay, so translating that into English, we would say, the Pharisees who say there is no resurrection. And again, the content of what they say is expressed by means of an infinitive. So those examples of the infinitive were after the verb lego. The infinitive is also used after keluo. Let's look at Matthew 14:19. Kai kelusas tous oklos anaklethenai. Yes, and if you look at the English translations, it is translated that he commanded the crowds to sit down. But if you look at that, it's anaklethenai, which is to lie down. Remember, in the Roman worlds, people used to recline to eat rather than sit at a table to eat. So, kelusas, he ordered, tous oklus, the crowd, to recline, the infinitive. As I say, that is just a natural way that we would express that in English. He ordered them to do something. Now, these usages don't exhaust the way the infinitive is used in the Greek New Testament. And I've gathered a few examples under the heading Other Stock Constructions of the kind of places that you will find an infinitive. And again, once you've seen them a couple of times, the infinitive is easy to understand and translate. So we have estin kalon plus infinitive. And this pretty much mirrors English. It is good to be here. For example, we have in Matthew 17:4, Peter answers and says to Jesus, Kuri, Lord, kalon estin humas hoda einai. It is good for us to be here. Einai being the infinitive, following naturally kalon estin. We have cryan echo and various forms of echo. That's why I say etc. here. I have need. And again, in English, we say I have need to. So this pretty much corresponds to English and is natural for us to translate and understand. I'm thinking about diakoluen. So John is kind of resisting. He's disputing a little bit. John questioned Jesus, saying, Ego cryan echo huposou baptisthenai. So I have need to be baptized by you. So I have need, followed by the infinitive. And preen plus the infinitive is used in the sense of before, 13 times in the New Testament and on 3 occasions in Matthew. Matthew 26:34, Jesus said, Truly I tell you that in this night, praying before electora phonesai, the cock sounds or makes a sound, the cock crowing. So before the cock crows 3 times, you will have denied me. Preen plus the infinitive means before. Now we do need to talk about the subject of the verb that's in the infinitive. In my book, Intermediate New Testament Greek Made Easier, I say the following about the subject of the verb in the infinitive. Normally the subject of the infinitive is the same as the subject of the main verb. As for example, philo poiein, you want to do in John 8:44. If, on the other hand, the writer wishes to make the subject of the infinitive different from that of the main verb, the subject is expressed in the accusative case. And the first example I give happens to be Matthew 14:28, and we have Matthew 14:28 right here. Peter answered him and said, Kyrie, ipsu I kileuson me elthine pros se, upon the water. Lord, if you are, or if it's you, order me, right? So me is the direct object of the verb order, but it's also the subject of the verb to come, elthine. Order me to come to you upon the water. So it is natural for the me there to be in the accusative case because it's the direct object of kileuson, and it's also the subject of the verb elthine. And we saw an earlier example of the subject of the verb in infinitive being in the accusative case when we looked at Matthew 27:14. And Jesus answered the governor, not one word, with the result that hosta thou madzine, with the result that somebody was astonished. Who was astonished? Ton hegemona, the governor in the accusative case. But the governor is still the subject of the verb to be astonished. And we have something similar happening in Matthew 15:31. Hosta ton oklon, with the result that the crowd, thalmassai, wondered. So the crowd is in the accusative case, but it is the subject of the verb in the infinitive, thalmassai, with the result that the crowd wondered when they saw the mute speaking, etc. I want to touch briefly on tense. There is a separate video where I talk about tense, and I say there are three things we need to pay attention to when we're understanding why a particular tense was used. We need to think of its aspect. We need to think of its type of action. And sometimes, for the indicatives and participles at least, we need to think of time considerations. But can you admire my big red line through time considerations? And it's kind of grayed out as well, because when it comes to the infinitive and subjunctive, for that matter, the time consideration is not there. So the difference between a present infinitive and a aorist infinitive is not time. It is in aspect and, as a result, type of action as well. So we have imperfective, perfective, and stative aspects. If we think of the example of a street parade, if you are standing next to the street parade, it's an ongoing event and you have an imperfective aspect. You see the action is ongoing. And the present tense of the infinitive mood has an imperfective aspect. So it talks about an action that is ongoing, and so it could be continuous or it could be iterative. There's a wide variety of things it could be, but it has to be ongoing. The aorist, on the other hand, is the view you get of the parade from a helicopter. You see the whole parade at once. So the aorist infinitive has a perfective aspect. It's talking about the action as a whole. And that is why sometimes the action is just a punctiliar point or something seen as complete. That is the difference between the present and aorist infinitive. It's not about time, it's about aspect. Is it part of an ongoing event, or is it describing action seen as a whole? What I have gathered here is the indicators of the infinitive. Now, some of these uses do not have an indicator. For example, the infinitive of purpose is just an infinitive used by itself, and it's the context of the sentence that suggests to us this is an infinitive of purpose. But with most of the other types of infinitives, there are some indications that an infinitive is to be expected. For example, there are many verbs that are naturally associated with infinitives, where the infinitive becomes the direct object of the verb. So we have Archimai, again, D, it is necessary. Didimi, I give. Not always an infinitive, but it could be. Dunamai, I am able. Almost always an infinitive. Fellow, I wish. Kaluo, I order. And mellow, I'm about to. So when you meet one of those verbs, you're going to be expecting an infinitive to follow. And in the articular infinitives, when we have to, an article followed by an infinitive, or dia to followed by an infinitive, or eis to followed by an infinitive, again, the construction is a clue that an infinitive is involved. And with these particular constructions, they have clear meanings: because, purpose, result, while, etc. The infinitive in impersonal expressions follows certain verbs. D, it is necessary, existent, it is lawful, and there are some other verbs there as well. The infinitive result is very clear cut. It's hoster plus infinitive. In indirect speech, you have the indication of the verb lego, and then you find an unexpected infinitive and you say, oh, I know what this is. This is an infinitive being used in indirect speech. And with other stock constructions, there are combinations of words that are naturally followed by an infinitive. It is good to, even in English we say that. I have need, etc. Now, how are we going to make the infinitive easier? Well, I think the key is practice. And one of the places you can go to for practice are the exercises in chapter 1 of my book, Intermediate New Testament Greek Made Easier. But I have an even better suggestion. Why don't you use either logos or accordance to look up all of the occurrences of the infinitive mood in the Gospel of Matthew and take the headings of the different uses of the infinitive and then go through each example that you find and say, this is the infinitive as the direct object of a verb, or the infinitive in indirect speech, or an infinitive of result. And when you've done that, you can compare your answers with mine, and I pretty much guarantee you will understand the uses of the infinitive very well. So how are we going to find all the examples of the infinitive mood in the Gospel of Matthew? Let me quickly show you for both logos and accordance how to do this. It is straightforward to use either logos or accordance to search for all the verbs in Matthew that are in the infinitive mood. I would go about it in logos in the following way. I would check that I had chosen morph rather than book or Bible, and then I would say I want to just search for Matthew, and I type in Matthew, or M-A-T-T, and Matthew Bible comes up as an option. My next step is to click in the search box and type Shift 2, which gives me an @ which brings up this drop-down menu. So I am searching for a verb, and I can choose its tense, its voice, its mood, its person, etc. Well, I want the infinitive mood. So I choose infinitive, and then I click up on the box and press return. Voila! We have 254 verbs in Matthew that are in the infinitive mood, and they are listed. Well, we're showing the last few. We can come right to the top and start in Matthew 1 and work down and look at every occurrence of an infinitive in the Gospel of Matthew. I can search accordance for verbs that are in the infinitive in the following way. First of all, I make sure I have chosen the Greek New Testament. So there is a list of available resources, and I have chosen the 28th edition of the Nestle Aland Greek New Testament. Then the next thing I do is I pressed Control 2, which brings up this marvelous function called a construct. And this actually does lots of interesting things. I'm just showing you one of the easy things you can do with it here. You take the verb, you bring it across here, and it says what person or voice or mood would you like? And look at that. We can choose an infinitive mood, and there it is. Search is all set up. except for the fact that I only want to look at the Gospel of Matthew. To do that, I limit the search. Oh, by the way, I've discovered that if I don't close the English parallel passage, it becomes very cluttered. So I've just closed that. Then I come up here to choose my range. I have other choices, but I want range. And then I come down there and, well, unfortunately, I've been here before, so I've already defined what Matthew looks like. I'll show you how to go about it. You type in Matthew there, and then you call it a name, and I've just been boring, and I've called it Matthew. Once you've done that, you verify it's a valid range, and then you update your search list. Because I've already got Matthew in there, I just click on there and I choose Matthew. It's all set up. How do I start it? I click on this box, I press enter, and wow, there they all are. Isn't that remarkable? This video is one of a series of videos that deal with various aspects of the grammar of the New Testament. These are most conveniently found by clicking on the subscribe button below and looking on the channel New Testament Greek Made Easier. And hey, if you found this video useful or enjoyed it in any way, why don't you click the like button below? Thank you.